Hey, team players, welcome to another episode of Local Football Flavor. In today's episode, Bob and I are going to break down our running back ranks for a PPR league, given where we believe they are going to end the year. And Bob has not yet seen my ranks, and this is going to be his first live seeing as we put them up here. So the one thing you notice is we both start with the top two the same of McCaffrey and Barkley. McCaffrey's kind of a no doubt. We're just going to leave it as there. Barkley, while he can't really be used more, he also, likewise with the Giants, can't be used less because they have no other talent there. They have a harder schedule than last year, and they showed by their game script last year. Remember, the New York Giants lost the first three quarters by every advanced metric and the scoreboard more than any other team in the NFL. And then they had massive fourth quarter comebacks, and Barkley did not suffer. I think that Barkley is actually set for a comeback up higher. Where we get into a little bit of difference, Bob and I have, is Bob believes there's really only going to be 7 worth having. I believe there's 9. And when we look at how we break up our top 7 and top 9, it's really going to be the divide. Because, quite frankly, once you get below those respective numbers on each of us lists, Bob being the orange 7 down, mine being 10 down, you know, they're kind of just names we got to give to. And we're going to focus now on people that I think are going to be in that useless category that Bob's in love with. So let's start with the King Henry. So, Bob, you have him as 5th. I have him as 12th. I think this is the year that everything comes apart in Tennessee. But because they're coached, they get 7 wins. But I don't think it's going to be pretty.
To be honest with you, when we've been talking about Derrick Henry this past year, I've been going back and forth in my feelings about him. And, you know, last year it seemed like he lost a step in terms of, contact, but the stats don't say that. So the stats, when you're talking about Derrick Henry's contact after, his rushing after the contact, it was still really, really good. It was still top notch in the league. It just felt like in certain games that when you were watching it, that it wasn't as ferocious and it wasn't as, he wasn't just bouncing off of people like he was in the past. He still is, but it didn't feel like he was so much. When it comes to Henry, though, the stat that I think is super important is just when it comes to the red zone and when it comes to running backs in general, red zone opportunities are really, really important. And Derrick Henry, outside of maybe a touchdown or two to a tight end, to a random tight end, he is, if he doesn't get them all the way down the field, he's going to be in for those goal line plays. If he gets them,
he either has to have the highest or second highest red zone percent, or handing the ball off percentage of plays behind Barkley, in my opinion.
Yeah,
because there is no one else each town.
Yeah, and the thing for him too is that if he were to break off a 75-yard run, there's a likelihood that they may take him out of the game to rest him a little bit because he has a lot of wear on the tires. He has 1,750 carries in his career. Yeah, and he's had a rush that's 98 yards in his career, and so we're not talking about spring chicken Derrick Henry anymore, but we're still talking about a guy who since 2018 hasn't scored less than 10 touchdowns, and when I'm looking at in a standard league, that is super valuable. So I'm probably in a standard league going to take him at maybe even in the first round, back end of the first round, if I feel bold enough to do it.
Much more valuable than standard, no doubt.
In a PPR league, we have seen just a added addition of value to keep him a little bit more spry, a little bit more healthy last season, where he was involved in some passing plays. He went from 18 receptions the previous year to 33 this year. When we think about reception value in PPR leagues, this adds a little bit more value to his opportunities. And the guy, outside of his worst season in, 2021 when he got hurt, basically, he still, at the beginning of the season, was one of the top rated, if not the best, fantasy running back that year. Had he not got hurt, he probably would have finished the year as the best. And so there's just something in me that Yes, Tennessee's offensive line is bad. Yes, Tennessee as a team is bad. But when I look at some other running backs that people are going in on and loving a lot, the Najees, the Cam Akers, Damian Pierce,
Well,
they're more so liking those for the value because I can get Najee in the third, I can get Damian Pierce like in the fifth or fourth, and I can get Cam Akers in the fifth or the sixth round too, depending on leagues. You're giving up a lot to get Derrick Henry when you get him. And I said previously to you, Joe, I said that he's worth, I don't know if he's worth that second round pick earlier in the offseason, but the more and more I look at who's available and I look at who's there, it's hard to pass on a guy who's averaging 1,000 yards a season and 10 touchdowns a season, even if he has a down year. Say he has a down year, right? You're looking at a player that's going to probably get somewhere in the vein of like 1,100 yards, maybe 1,200 yards, and 8-9 touchdowns. And even if he drops to
very
7,
nice floor for Derrick Henry, yeah.
Right? Even if he drops to 7, the only thing that's keeping him out of the top 5 at the end of the year would be an injury or something catastrophic to happen in Tennessee. And his floor, yeah, you're probably going to get a couple more games from Derrick Henry, more so that are like 40 to 50 yards, and that's not great. But there's a very real possibility that your team is either looking like Diggs and Henry, A.J. Brown and Henry, or maybe you're taking Saquon and Henry. And if that's the case, that's not bad.
Running backs here where we think they're going to end. This is where we believe they're going to end the year. So
yeah, but I'm saying just for strictly drafting purposes, there is a realistic expectation. So when you look at the guys that I have below Derrick Henry, these are all players who have question marks. There are question marks to their performance. There's question marks to if they're going to play the year. There's question marks just in terms of being a rookie. Being a rookie is a question mark. It's not a very, and having, when I say, Derrick Henry over Bijan, there's an opportunity for Tyler Algier or somebody else to take some carries in Atlanta. Yes. When it comes to Taylor, there's a good chance that Richardson could take some goal line carries away from him if they get to the goal line. For Tony Pollard, there's a chance that
Pollard's never shown he can handle more than 15 carries a game in his career. That's a giant volume.
But he was from week 7 to week 16 the highest scoring running back in fantasy football, even with 53% of the carries. So
yeah, I'm just saying they don't give him the volume. And it will to conclude Henry here, so we don't turn this into a 6-hour episode.
To conclude on Henry, when you look at his floor to where his ceiling could be, it is one of the tightest windows, I think, for a running back, notwithstanding injury. And I think these top 5 backs, if you're looking at a floor, the floor seems to be around 8 touchdowns total for these top 5, top 6 backs. And now you don't want to draft on floor, you want to draft on ceiling. But again, these top 5 guys have that opportunity. And even if you wanted to add Bijan into the mix there, these guys have the opportunity to get over 1,600 all-purpose yards on the season with the potential to get 12 to 15 touchdowns. And that is something that most wide receivers can't do. And one of the reasons why these guys are constantly being fed to you, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Chubb, Eckler, and Henry, because they are elite. They are as elite as you can possibly get, with minimal question marks outside of injury for McCaffrey and Barkley, and just general. Are they going to get the ball as much as they did in the past? And for Henry, it just doesn't seem like there's another option.
And for me having Bijan at 3, it's almost for everything you said, with a couple of major advantages that Bijan has that Henry doesn't. First off, Bijan has the coach who made Henry Henry. So that's how they're going to be used. He has a much better offensive line in front of him. Now, the limitation Bijan has is he has two really good receivers on that team and the potential that they might get the ball forced to him in the red zone. But his major advantage is the quarterback. Atlanta has not really shown that they trust throwing the ball in the red zone. And when you don't trust that, you give the ball to your running back. And that's why I think ultimately Bijan is going to carry them. Not to mention the fact that Atlanta is playing the most cupcake schedule in the world. And if they do pull out the 11-plus win season that both of us are leaning towards, they're going to be running the ball a lot. And yet, a lot of fantasy football folks are going to think that was an absolutely crazy sentence. Atlanta's probably winning 11-plus games this year, just for the simple fact that their schedule is that horrendous. And that's just a fact of life.
In a good way.
Oh, yeah, no, it's a good thing for Atlanta. And we said that so long ago that we didn't believe that. My fourth spot, and we both agree he's a real dog, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on him, is Jonathan Taylor. 2 years ago, the best running back in football. Last year, just complete and utter disaster, both with his health, the quarterback system there. A head coach who was so far over his head, had no idea what he was doing. And when we look at what Philadelphia did with their running game, granted, it was a little bit of inconvention with Hurts. It still was a system that was running the ball centric. And I believe Jonathan Taylor is going to vastly benefit from that because Jonathan Taylor is more talented than any running back Philadelphia had last year or this year. And that's why I believe that Taylor is just primed to have a top 5 season. You know, both of us have hit on Taylor?
Yeah, if Taylor is worth what we think he is, and he is better than Miles Sanders, we have seen that. And we saw that I'm not comparing Jalen Hurts to Richardson at this point in time, just strictly based on coaching. Shane took a player in Miles Sanders, and on a team where Hurts was getting so many carries and getting a lot of touchdowns, Sanders still had like 13 touchdowns last year. And that can't be, written away. And so when you look at...
That's a scheme.
Yeah, and when you look at Taylor, if they scheme this the right way for Richardson to succeed, and say, even for Gardner Minshew to succeed, there's a real expectation here that Taylor could go he's definitely going to get more than he did last year in this injury-riddled, bad, underperforming season. But Richardson's going to help that because when you think about what the Colts had last year, they had immobile quarterbacks. When you have immobile quarterbacks that are just basically staying in the pocket or can't move the pocket for some reason or another, the running back suffers from that. And with Richardson being able to move the pocket, say he stays healthy, say he's a golden boy, say maybe he gets 16 passing touchdowns this year, and maybe like 8 rushing touchdowns this year. That means that he's moving the ball. And there's a good opportunity to see that Jonathan Taylor could eclipse that 1,000-yard mark again and get upwards of 10 touchdowns.
Yeah, and I believe it's going to happen. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on Eckler. Everyone's in love with him. We're cooled down on him, relatively speaking, because he had so much red zone volume that I don't think he's going to get that same target share again in there in the red zone. Just simple fact that Mike Williams and now Quentin's there. They're healthy. They're going to take the touchdowns away from Eckler. He had such an anomaly; it's irrepeatable. But to your
point, Joe, about Eckler, though, is the best thing about him outside of these rookie running backs is that he has, for being in the league as long as he's been in the league from Christian McCaffrey's coming in. So as a comparison there, Christian McCaffrey, Eckler, and I think Derrick Henry came in the league in 2016. So if you just take 2017 to now, Eckler is like a spring chicken. He has 811 total carries and 389 receptions. You posit that to Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey's at over 1,000 carries and over 442 receptions. So it's very well possible that if Eckler is used as a running back more, that we could see those numbers, those rushing numbers, him finally getting a season over 1,000 yards. We just don't see it.
No,
And,
they're not built to do that. The coaching staff won't allow it.
But they're built to move the ball. And so if you believe in the Chargers having a good season, which I think they are going to have a good season, Eckler is going to be a part of that. And it's a very real possibility that he totals, again, over 15, 16 touchdowns on the year, whether that's receiving or rushing, whatever happens. I think it's going to happen.
Yeah, and one of the guys you have ahead of him there in Chubb is someone that I put pause to. So my pause for Eckler is there's no way he can get that same percentage of touchdowns he did last year. And I don't like buying people at their highest point. My problem with Chubb is I don't believe that the offense catered to him anymore. We look at everyone else on your top 10, with the exception of maybe Najee and maybe Gibbs. The rest of that core top 8, the offense is built around their running back. It is not the case in Cleveland. Nick Chubb is probably more talented than some of the people that I have above him, particularly Eckler. However, Cleveland knows they have to make Watson a winner. They basically mortgage the reputation, everything of their franchise on Deshaun Watson. They are changing their offense from being an under center to a shotgun-based offense. Now, Chubb has performed in shotgun before, but he performs much better under center. And that is completely removed like that. He's never really been a pass catcher. And when we culminate the fact that Watson is looking horrible in training camp, yesterday alone, for the day we're recording this, they did a joint practice with Philly, who picked them off 3 times and sacked them 8. Cleveland's offense is in massive trouble, and they're going to be throwing the ball from behind. And I think Nick Chubb is ultimately the man who suffers. And the reason I only took him down to 6th on my list, he's still one of the 3 most talented running backs in the world. He's just in a system that is not going to work.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying with that, but I'm also under the guise of when we look at teams whose quarterbacks are struggling, there is an idea there where, yes, some of them will release it a little bit earlier, but there's also that idea or what should be an idea with the coaching staff, that we're going to take a little bit of that pressure off the quarterback who's struggling and give a little bit to the running back who's supremely talented. Now,
they don't have that option, though.
Well, Nick Chubb, I mean, you can. I mean, you spent a lot of money.
They have that option. Politically, they don't have that option. That's why they're not going to do it.
I don't buy into that much. I think the politics of owning Deshaun Watson on your team is one thing. Yes, you paid a lot to have him on your team, and yeah, you're going to have to keep playing him, and whether he's bad or not bad. But I mean, we've seen teams where they go out and they buy a player, that player ends up sucking, and that player, it doesn't. Again, Trey Lance is an example of this in San Francisco. They went out and bought Trey Lance for a high price tag, and now he went out and sucked in his preseason debut. He can't even make reads of a quarterback who, a high school quarterback, and they're not going to play him. And so Watson, I feel to a greater extent is kind of this, because you spent a lot of actual money on him, not just draft capital. You spent a lot of actual money on him. And we're looking at, we're saying, okay, the NFC or the AFC schedule is not very forgiving, right? You play the Steelers twice a year, you play the Bengals twice a year.
Hardest division of football.
And you play the Ravens twice a year. So, when you're looking at Watson and you say, okay, well, where does this put Chubb at? I'm high on Chubb. I'm taking him at a point now where it feels like every single season we've seen Nick Chubb, he's gotten better as just a pure runner, and he has overcome a lot of bad scheming. He's overcome a lot of bad offensive lines. He's overcome a lot of bad quarterback play. I'm just saying in general.
Great run blocking offensive line. Can't pass block though.
I'm saying in general, when we're talking about the defenses coming on from the AFC North, coming through that line, there's a lot of stellar players that can knock you on your rear end really, really quickly. And Chubb has overcome that for the most part. He's the only reason why, you would even fear facing Cleveland for the most part in most years. And they're most likely going to see the ball a lot. This is why I say this. Last year, their defense was putrid. There is no inclination that defense is going to be any better this year at all. And so there are going to be numerous opportunities for this Cleveland offense to take the field. Granted, yes, they might be behind a lot. But even when they're behind, Chubb is a guy, and again, with, Chubb's backup, there's Kareem Hunt's gone. There's less than Kareem Hunt there now. But even last year, Kareem Hunt didn't really do much to get in the way of Nick Chubb anyway. So Chubb is the guy. When you're talking about having the guy, and you brought this up in what you said about your top 8, top 9, top 10, when you're the guy and you're the only show in town, it doesn't matter if you're losing the game or not losing the game. You're in this game. Chubb is, as a receiver, we want to see more out of him as a receiver. That is true. But when it comes down to his relationship with Deshaun Watson, we saw last year that during the time Deshaun Watson was in, he went from being running back 6 to like running back 30 and running back 23 in terms of total points per game. You say that's going to happen more so than I do, but I think that in order for Cleveland to click, there's going to have to be a realization that I just spent $1 bajillion on Deshaun Watson, and he might not be as good as I think or thought he was, but I still have Nick Chubb. So when push comes to shove, if I have to tell Deshaun Watson to hand the ball off 25 times a game to Nick Chubb, I'm going to have to do that. And that's kind of where I have Nick Chubb at. I think he's not going to get 1,500 yards like he did last year. I think realistically, he's probably going to fall into like 1,300 yards and probably like 13 touchdowns because they're going to move the ball at some point in time. They're going to get in the red zone. And he's a really good runner in the red zone too. So, there's just no way that I could drop him as far as 6, 7, 8 when I think that there is still a little bit of upside there.
I think Cleveland as an organization is about to hit the dumpster fire inferno. And if they lose week 1 to a Cincinnati team that doesn't have Joe Burrow, he will not have the head coach will be fired before Halloween. And with that being said, I don't want a running back on a complete utter disaster. The only thing that holds me back from saying he's going to be the first head coach fired is Oakland still exists.
Vegas, yeah. But I want to talk. I want to talk a little bit about this, Joe. I want to talk a little bit about this player because it's a player that we both are kind of in the middle on. We like him. We're hoping as fans of the organization that he does better. But Najee is one of those players that profiles not very good. And when we look at his profile, it does match a little bit of some of the things that we don't like about Dameon Pierce fall on also with Najee as well. When we think about the Steelers' ineptitude with Matt Canada to move the ball, the quarterback situation, is it good? Is it not good? When we look at Najee's just efficiency numbers, they're trash. They're really garbage. So talk to us a little bit about why for you Najee's at 7 and why you have him as a top 10 running back to finish the year and even draft in the third rounds of fantasy drafts.
Yeah, so first off, the Steelers' offense, I don't believe will be as bad as it was last year for a couple of main reasons. First, Pickett left 3 of the games as he started as a rookie due to injury. And when Trubisky was in there, he was the most turnover machine of any quarterback that played more than 2 games the entire season in terms of turnovers per game. So the Steelers lost a lot of possessions that they are not going to lose this year. Secondly, because it's now not a rookie quarterback and a second-year quarterback, it is reasonable to expect much more third-down conversions and therefore longer drives and more opportunities for Najee. Last year, the Pittsburgh Steelers had nearly the worst third quarter in NFL history. It was the 4th worst in terms of yards allowed, yards for, first downs for, and likelihood of punting. That's all they did. They did 3 outs basically the third quarter the entire year. So when you look at that and say, is the likelihood of the Steelers offense being that restrained and that bad to happen again? And my firm answer is there's no way it's possible to be that bad again. So almost by default, Najee's situation is on an upswing. From the player himself, he was injured for the first 6 weeks of the year. You could tell it by watching the film. He did not have his burst. But he did have it at the end of the year. And this is why I ultimately have Najee in my top 15 and not someone that neither of us have in here, which is Dobbins. Dobbins got hurt as well and had a strong follow-up at the end of the year. Difference is Dobbins' situation is pointing way south, while Najee's situation is pointing incredibly north. So I do believe that Najee is going to get many more points than expected for the simple fact that most people are not projecting the Pittsburgh Steelers offense to really be any good based upon what they saw out of the quarterback. And the reason this is diving into the importance of why I said he got injured in 3 games, if you do the math of just the 13 games that Kenny Pickett appeared in, the numbers don't look good. But if you do it rather on a per-play basis that Kenny was in, he was about the 10th best efficient offense. So when you look at it and go, oh, he only really played 2 series against Baltimore. He only played 2 series in the other game. And when you look, you go, well, obviously you're not going to have good game stats if you don't play for 3 quarters. So when you go across the math of it, I don't believe there's not a way that the Steelers don't have at least the 15th best offense. And when they get into it, you look at the Steelers' schedule, the AFC North's whole schedule, actually. They get to play Cleveland, who can't stop anyone on the ground. But they get the entire AFC South, with the exception of Jacksonville, doesn't have a run-stopping defense of note. Mm-hmm. And then you look at their other division, 2 of those teams in the AFC West are trying to get the first pick in the draft. Najee Harris is going to have a ton of opportunities where the Steelers should have leads, which, by the way, they did not have it all last year. The Pittsburgh Steelers were right up there with the Giants and Minnesota as far as 4th down comebacks, and presumably with a more efficient offense and a quarterback who's been around the block, they're going to be in a better situation. So that's the long story short of why I think Najee really is prime. He might actually be underrated having him at 7. I believe that he's going to take off. And someone like Tony Pollard that you have above him, I don't have belief in at all because he's not able to handle the load in and out. He's able to be a great 1B. I don't think he can be a 1 by himself, and that's what Dallas is banking on for Tony Pollard. I really think he's just going to get worn down and fizzled out, and Dallas is going to end up being essentially the Chargers of the NFC. They're just going to throw the ball the whole time. But Pollard doesn't have the clout of Eckler, where Eckler gets the ball thrown to him in the end zone over Allen. Pollard ain't getting the ball thrown to him over Lamb. And to me, that's the giant difference of why I am so low on Pollard compared to many other people out there.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying with that with Pollard. And I really like that breakdown of Najee there because not a lot of people will go in and think about it from that efficiency of when you were talking about Kenny Pickett being on the field. And Kenny Pickett makes a world of difference because, again, this is a quarterback who can move the pocket. This is a quarterback who can run. He shouldn't run as much as he did. But, we're talking about when we look at these top running backs on the board here, and you're looking at these top 15 guys, and we think about their quarterback situation, I think that that's also something important to think about too. Christian McCaffrey, we have Brock Purdy, who we're not really 100% sure what's happening there at all. Daniel Jones, we have Saquon Barkley. Daniel Jones loves to run the ball. Hopefully he gets a little bit better in his deep balls so that they can move it down the field in that way too. Chubb with Watson, we just talked about that. Eckler with Herbert. Herbert's a pure domination, right? Henry has not had, I mean, you think about Ryan Tannehill was a serviceable quarterback at one point in time. We don't know what Will Levis or Tannehill is going to do this year. Bijan has a second-year quarterback as well. Taylor has a rookie quarterback. Pollard has Dak, and like we've talked about with Dak before, it's an unknown of what Dak is going to do. It seems like we always overvalue Dak when it comes to we overvalue the Dak. We always overvalue any Dallas quarterback in general. I think Dallas could win the division this year, but I am in the minority on that one. Go to Gibbs. You have Goff, Jacobs with Garoppolo, Stevenson with Mac Jones. Mac Jones isn't great. Aaron Jones with
once you get
Love.
The running backs is most of them, to your point, don't have a good quarterback with them, and this is where the two that stand out there, to the degree that they are good, is Eckler and Pollard. And your point is well taken. But like I said, that's why I think Pollard has the potential of a bust much more than most people have. You look at most people's big boards, Pollard's borderline top 5. I don't even think he's top 10.
Oh, no. So, I wouldn't take Pollard. I wouldn't take Pollard until the back half of the second round. I mean, I'm not going crazy on Tony Pollard here, but I do think that even with that metric of only having 53% of, the load, Dallas still has these other running backs, and while they're not Zeke, they will use them. So I think saying that, that he's not, I don't think he's going to be used as a primary 1A in the vein that Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry are used. I think he's probably going to be used more so in that kind of Najee versus Stevenson kind of thing, where we've seen Jaylen Warren get a couple of plays, more so as he gets a little bit better within the offense. And I think that's kind of what a Tony Pollard type of back is. So where you're saying, he could be.
I think his biggest comp is Eckler, based on everything we went through.
It's a good possibility.
You brought up someone there that I do want to talk about in Ramondre Stevenson. Obviously, this week, Zeke signs in New England. And the question has been, should Stevenson's value drop? Should Ramondre Stevenson be borderline undraftable? And I have to say up front, Stevenson's value should go up. Ezekiel Elliott is about the opposite of the Patriot way as you can be. And in the long run, I believe it's a very poor connection in terms of signing. But anytime, and I just ask you this as the listener out there, anytime you've seen two people connect and they're both in a state of supreme desperation, how well does that end? And that is what Zeke in New England is. And as a result of what that inevitable off-field dumpster fire will be, Ramondre Stevenson is going to just be given the ball. Now, I think he might have the best situation of anyone in the NFL not named Saquon Barkley. The problem is that team is incapable of moving the ball. Just period. Unless Ramondre Stevenson gets a 20-plus yard run, they don't have the ability of getting a 20-yard play. I mean, that's just how the Patriots are built. And like I said, I think Zeke being there actually helps Stevenson in the long run. And I do think that, at the end of the day, if there was any confidence I had in Mac Jones moving the ball downfield, I would move Stevenson into the top 10. I just don't see a scenario where this doesn't become a field goal offense.
Yeah, they're not good. And the fact that they're not good, it says a lot when on Twitter, now X, and all of social media platforms are saying, like, Belichick's on the hot seat.
Should be.
You're putting a legendary coach on the hot seat. Yeah, because this offense has been very inefficient, putrid at most times to watch. And it's a shame because the defense is actually really, really good. There was a point in time last year.
Lean on the running game.
Yeah,
it makes the defense better.
There was a point in time last year where I really thought that they had a chance to make the playoffs, but the more and more you watch the games, the more and more Mac Jones is not the guy. Bailey Zappi's not the guy. There's no guy there other than Ramondre Stevenson. And the fact that you brought up is it's a really important point to point out is that this offense only moves through Stevenson. Ezekiel Elliott can't move the ball. And we've seen that his yards per carry metrics have gone down by almost 0.5 to a yard every single year that he's been in the league. And the only thing that fantasy football, analysts are saying is that if they do happen to make it to the red zone, Ezekiel Elliott could be the guy that takes over that Damian Harris role and gets punches in the touchdowns. Well, let's pump the brakes on that for a minute, because getting in the end zone would have to mean that you can still run the ball fairly well and can get 2 to 3 yards per carry, which it doesn't feel like Ezekiel Elliott could do anymore. And with the way that offense plays, if you put Zeke on the field, it's most likely not going to move the ball more so than they didn't move the ball when they had Stevenson in the game. So the reason I have Stevenson ranked as 12 is because his upside is, out of all of the running backs in the league, I think his upside, on the vein of Dameon Pierce's upside as well, is very, very much capped by how their offense is going to move the ball down the field, because I just don't think Houston's going to move the ball. And I just don't think that that New England's going to move the ball. But I think that New England has a better shot when you put Stevenson out in the flat, when you get him the ball in space, because he has some sort of talent that's not like a plotting style talent. But in that regard, I don't see him getting more than 5-6 touchdowns this year, and I don't see him getting more than maybe 1,050 yards this year. And to be honest with you, once you get past Josh Jacobs in terms of running backs, and you're getting into the likes of the Mixons, the Walkers, Sanders, Hall, Aaron Jones, I like Jones the most out of the ones that I mentioned there. But when you get past Jacobs, there are just way, way, way too many question marks to say that any of those players have the opportunity to be top 10 in the league by year's end, whether that's in a touchdown category or whether that's in total yardage or both put together. When we speak of these top 10 players, 11 if you stop at Josh Jacobs, you're getting to a point where, at least on my list, where each one of those players, their situation is, outside of Jacobs, solid, right? Gibbs, and I'm going to speak on Gibbs for a minute here, and you can chime in on that. Gibbs' situation in Detroit is an interesting one, right? Because you and I both have had Montgomery on our fantasy teams in the past when he was at Chicago. There were years that Montgomery did pretty good. There were games that he did really, really bad. There were games where he saw maybe 2 touches and then Khalil Herbert or somebody else came in and took over for him. And, people are positing that Montgomery is going to take over that role that Jamal Williams filled. But there's a blessing here for the Detroit Football Lions. And where it comes in at is that these are very complementary backs to one another. And as a team, there is a better chance that the Detroit Lions move the ball than the New England Patriots.
Oh, absolutely.
And when you have an offense that can move the ball, I would want to have a piece of that offense, especially in the backfield, because I think that Detroit is going to always be in the game, whether that's coming back from being down or whether that's holding a lead. And when you have two really talented running backs that you can keep operating and switching in and out, yeah, on a game-by-game basis, Jamir Gibbs might not start the year totaling over 100 yards a game. But the benefit of Jamir Gibbs over any of these other running backs is if he stays healthy, he's going to be the freshest come your fantasy playoffs. And when you have a fresh running back, we have seen what happens a la Jerick McKinnon when he was catching all those touchdowns towards the end of the year. When you have somebody who is not taking all those bumps early in the season and plays out that whole year, there's a really good opportunity that Jamir Gibbs could outplay this 10 ranking that I have on him. And he could end up flying up the board because there is no inclination that this Detroit Lions team couldn't perform better than they did last year, notwithstanding injuries and the like. And Gibbs is one of those pieces as a rookie. Yeah, I don't really trust rookies in general a lot, but Gibbs being drafted in the third round, is a really good opportunity to outplay his ADP. And by season's end, you have a running back that could potentially have, let's just say, 960 to like 1,100 yards, 7 touchdowns, and potentially 40 receptions out on the field. That's really, 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 really good.
Yeah, and the Gibbs is an unknown. I mean, there's just no way around it. Because we saw with Detroit last year when they went all in to break that team rushing touchdown record. They did it. And they made it a big thing. And obviously, Amon-Ra suffered from that. But they also didn't really use Swift the way that anyone expected them to. They threw him out of the bus. You know, presumably this is now the knee biter they want at running back. This is the guy who's going to fulfill it all. So, I mean, there is a very real possibility that Gibbs becomes a top 5 back. And then there's also a possibility the Detroit Lions become the Detroit Lions of my entire life and he's irrelevant. And that is why I have Gibbs at 13, because I lean much more to likelihood that some things are just meant to be. Cleveland and Oakland will fail, and so will Detroit. It's one of the things I believe in, and unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of scientific logic behind that, but it is that same logic of why I have Aaron Jones in my top 10. There's coaches that just know how to win and get the most out of their players. And I believe that Green Bay is going to be the team that everyone's sleeping on this year that's going to make the playoffs. And when it's all said and done, I've said this many times and many times over, Aaron Jones is going to lead that team in touchdowns. There is just no other way around it. So when Aaron Jones leads the team in touchdowns, that's what you want. So, team players, we hope that you enjoyed our breakdown of our running backs in a PPR list. Tomorrow we'll be breaking down another position for you guys to see. We hope you guys do great in your drafts and take this information to win a ton of money. That is the goal. Also, on the note of money, we will be doing our best ball leagues coming up. So reach out to us at our contact information you can see on the YouTube channel page, and we will get you guys set up to be in one of the best ball leagues with both Bob and I. So I hope you're having a great day, and we'll see you next week.